welcome to Ill-Equipped History, where two idiots tell you about a moment in time in history. I caught Emily very off guard with that intro.
I was mid-yawn. Those choking sounds were real. Oh, but it's so true.
Oh my gosh. I'm still thinking about our last recording session, which was yesterday for the two of us. And oh boy.
Wow.
Chaotic.
So much for the blooper reel is coming from that one recording session.
Oh boy. I told Kyle a little bit about it yesterday after we finished, and even he was like, ha ha ha. Ooh, my cheeks still kind of hurt. Oh man. Ooh. I'm Morgan, by the way. I didn't introduce myself in case this is your first time listening. Emily, how are you doing today?
Oh my god, I painted the ceiling in the living room.
You did it! Yay!
I did it! I think I'm gonna need another gallon of paint, but I'm not dwelling on that right now. I had one of those moments where I painted it, and it hadn't dried yet, and I looked up, and I had that brief moment of like, I hate it. And then it dried, and I was like, no, I don't hate it. It was just...
It was in the process.
It was in the process. I have to trust the process. I'm still not completely done. I should be able to finish the living room ceiling tomorrow. Fingers crossed. I had a revelation about 15 minutes ago that maybe I shouldn't paint the walls yet because Parker is still in a cone and he hits all the walls. So maybe I should wait another week.
Until he's out of the cone.
Until he's out of the cone. At least the walls. But there's other things I can do. But, we're almost there, guys.
And this is Home Renovation with Emily. It has been a process for years at this point.
Yeah. We've lived in this house for, how old is my son? 8 years now. And there hasn't been a moment I haven't been working on something. Big or small, something. Yeah.
She's sanded all of the ceilings in her house, has ripped out the floors, has painted her cabinets, gardened a lot, and just ripped up a bunch of stuff in the landscaping.
I've painted every room in the house at least once, some of them twice already. The living room, this is its third color.
One day you'll find that perfect color.
I will. And you know what? I'm finally finding my style. I'm finding my aesthetic the way I like it. I'm constantly browsing Marketplace for furniture, and if I find furniture I like on Marketplace, I've literally bought something and then completely redone it just to make it how I want it. So
she's very handy, y'all. She's a multifaceted gal.
I am a pain in the ass to my husband is what I am. He doesn't even question anything anymore. I'll text him. I'm like, hey, babe, I've got an idea. And he's like, I don't like where this is going. I'm just going to cost.
Well, I was about to say, I'm waiting for the day you say I've torn down a wall, but you've already done that. So
I did. He was, it was the day that he went and got that International Harvester truck, which apparently I told him to go get, which it was free, so whatever. He was gone getting that, and he wouldn't respond to my text messages. And I got bored, and I got a little irritated, and I was like, I'll just look behind the drywall and see what's back there. And next thing I know, the whole wall's down. So
super cash.
And then I had a lot of drywall stuff to fix past that. It's fine. Everything's fine. How have you been?
Scattered. But, that's not really too different than normal. So I've been getting really into watching bad book reviews on YouTube.
Hell yeah.
With like very funny women YouTubers that have like very sarcastic senses of humor and are just very funny. So that's kind of what I've been getting into in
love it.
My lessening moments of free time.
I love that. I love a good book review. I cannot trust Book Talk.
No.
I don't feel like, because they lie. They're like, this is the best book I've ever read, and I'll read it and I'm like, I've caught about 5 typos.
Yeah.
In this paragraph. I don't know what's happening.
Some of the books that I've watched, they were very popular on Book Talk, and the YouTubers have just like torn them apart just for not good writing. Not saying that every book that trends on Book Talk is bad. That's not the case at all. But it does seem there's a correlation with like trending on Book Talk and like super toxic love story or problematic characters, and not in like a good, meaningful, like not retrospective, but like kind of, you know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
But like there's no nuance to it.
But I also am guilty of a dark romance novel lover. I'm guilty as shit. Like if the books that I like to read, if someone talked to me like that in real life, they would get throat punched. Yeah. But for some reason, if it's in a book, it's okay.
Well, and you know what? Like, whatever you like to read, like, they're fictional characters. Like, it's just a story. That's fine. It doesn't mean it's, like, something you want. Like, art is art, and you're allowed to enjoy art however you want, because it's not hurting anyone.
Exactly. As long as my husband doesn't do that, we're fine.
Well, it's exactly what we were talking about last week with video games, you know, like, yeah, there's violent video games, but it doesn't mean people are violent in real life.
Yeah. Yeah, I've played plenty Grand Theft Auto. I have never murdered a hooker in real life. Like, not once.
Anyway, shall we get started? Almost 10 minutes into our episode.
We shall.
Sorry about that tangent, y'all. 1850. A ship leaves from Guangzhou, China, headed to San Francisco, California. 2 immigrants, Chen and Hao, are planning their futures in America.
So, what are you going to do with all your gold?
I'm going to send as much as I can to my mom, so she can build a big house and hire a lot of servants. She's getting old, and it pains me to see her still farming at her age. How about you?
I want to open my own restaurant. I want to share my mother's cooking with the whole world.
Your mom does make amazing food. You're no slouch yourself.
Thanks. How lucky is it that we heard about the Gold Mountain all the way out in our little village?
So lucky. How big do you think Gold Mountain is?
I bet you can't even see past the peak. It's so high up. All of America is so wealthy, there's no way they can miss a little bit missing from an entire gold mountain. We don't need much to accomplish our dreams.
You're right. We'll just take what we need and live our lives.
Plus, I'm going to be loaded in cash anyway from my restaurant.
You know what? I bet you will be. Save me a bowl of soup every now and then.
Of course, friend. Anytime. I don't have a good feeling for his mama or his restaurant.
No. These are fictional characters, but yes, this is not a happy episode. I'm sorry, everyone. I have another bummer. But when I picked this topic over a month, it was almost like a month and a half ago when I picked this topic, and I'm just now talking about it because circumstances. And I was like, I don't really see people talking about this. I've seen like mentions of it here and there, but I've never seen a really big deep dive into the topic we're going to be talking about today. And then the more I was researching and the more that's been coming up just in our current era of life, it's very topical for what's going on especially in the US at this time and just in other places around the world. So today we're going to be talking about Chinese immigration into the United States over the past couple centuries and the Chinese Exclusion Act and the ramifications of it and into modern day. And we're going to be specifically focusing on Chinese immigration because this is the Chinese Exclusion Act specifically focused on people from China, not really other countries.
Okay.
But later, as we talk about more modern history, like I won't be talking about strictly Chinese immigrants all the time, but primary for the most part. But like I said, you're going to hear a lot of parallels from the past probably 20 years today because history is just an endless cycle on a loop forever, apparently. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. There are 3 distinct periods of immigration from China into the United States. The first peak was between 1849 and 1882. The second period is between 1882 and 1965, and then from 1965 to present day, which we'll talk a little bit about towards the end with like modern immigration. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about why Chinese people started immigrating to the U.S. in the first place. So in the 19th century, China was just not having a great time in the entire country. Overpopulation was starting to become a really serious factor, and to the point where local governments were not able to effectively govern their communities. Like, it was just too much. Around the 1850s, there were about 450 million people. I said 1850s. Around the 1850s, there were about 450 million people living in China.
Wow.
Which doesn't seem that much when you compare in 2024 is 1.5 billion.
Yeah.
But still, that's a lot of people in the 19th century. The government itself had a lot of issues. Unfortunately, there was corruption, embezzlement. There were very authoritarian practices. Because like as the government starts losing control, it tends to crack down harder. And that made people unhappy, which led to rebellions and uprisings and conflict. So, and we just spent a lot of time talking about similar topics 100 years prior in Europe, or several hundred years prior in Europe. And on top of all of this, and a little bit later, between 1873 and 1876, there was a massive drought, which led to a major famine. Between 1876 and 1879, where about 9.5 million people died.
Whoa.
Tragic.
That's horrible.
To the point where people were taking apart their homes to sell the pieces or committing suicide so they didn't starve to death. Like, it was really, really bad.
Wow.
And on top of all this, China was dealing with a major opium addiction epidemic.
Yeah.
Where 10% of the total population of China were addicted to opium. And in rural areas, that went up to about 80%.
What?
For comparison, according to the CDC in 2022, 11.6% of U.S. adults regularly smoke cigarettes, and 73% drink coffee every day.
More people were on opium in the smaller villages than modern people drink coffee.
In the U.S., yeah.
Wow.
And when you think about the population of cigarette smokers in the U.S., about that percentage were addicted to opium. And opium and cigarettes are a lot different.
Oh, yeah.
So, really not great things happening in China at the time.
Right.
Meanwhile, in the U.S., the gold rush is happening. You hear about gold being found in California, and it makes its way worldwide.
Yeah.
And the message got kind of corrupted on its way from California to China, to the point where people in China heard there was a literal gold mountain.
Oh, no.
And so they were like, oh my God, there's gold mountains in California. We're in poverty. Let's go over to California and gold mine and get some of this money for ourselves and like for our families.
I mean, what do they have to lose at this point? You either starve to death here or you take a chance and you try to get to a gold mountain or at least something.
Yeah. And word had gotten to Hong Kong by 1849, and by 1951, 25,000 Chinese immigrants were on their way to California to participate in the gold rush. And at this time, Chinese immigrants had already started like settling worldwide, quote, from Polynesia to Peru. So they just weren't as populous in the United States at this point until the gold rush. Unfortunately, most people did not find success in the gold rush.
Yeah.
Even just U.S. citizens. It was a total bust for the majority of people that went on. And now you have a bunch of young, mostly immigrant men, or mostly young men from China who barely speak English, who may not have had any kind of formal education at all, and may not have quote-unquote skilled labor experience, just kind of stuck in the U.S. with nowhere to go. Well, around this time, there was a form of labor that was like, hey, we would love it if we didn't pay people like a living wage because this shit's expensive and we want to make more money. Oh, hey, there's this entire group of people who have no other options. Let's pay them pennies on the dollar to do this horrible labor, and they have no other form of remediation. They'll gladly take the work. So there was a bunch of Chinese laborers working the railroads.
And I'm sure it's a situation that they kept literally anything they could live off of and sent the rest back home.
That's exactly what was going on.
Yeah. We see this time and time again.
Again.
And it's sad.
History is a continuous, like, revolving door of the same events happening in different parts of the world.
Yep.
And, like, around, like, at this time, I mean, the railroads were desperate for workers, but most, like, U.S.-born laborers and American citizens, they were, like, they knew how to fight for, you know, equal wages or appropriate living wages. Mm-hmm. And they didn't want to work themselves to death for not enough to feed themselves or their families. And now, again, you have all these desperate people that are like, we'll take any kind of money we can because we're stuck here.
Right.
And this was the main way for Chinese laborers to enter the U.S. workforce. Minimal pay, high chance of death or injury during this time. They didn't have rights. Yeah. They weren't even citizens. And by 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, and there are no records of how many Chinese men worked on or died on this project. They finished the Transcontinental Railroad in 5 years.
And guys, that's across the United States, across the continent.
Yes. Through the Rocky Mountains. And honestly, I was watching a few different documentaries. There was a couple on PBS I found, a couple on YouTube that I found. My sources are in the show notes. And the source I got this from said that if it hadn't been for the Chinese laborers, it would not have been done in that amount of time. Because they were extremely, extremely hard workers. And there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Well, once the railroad started drying up, because they finished the Transcontinental Railroad, so they started, they were still here. So they started moving into different workforces, agriculture, garment factories, and other factories. Mm-hmm. And some eventually started becoming successful enough to open their own businesses. When the Chinese immigrants were first coming to the U.S., they were very welcome. They were seen as quiet, diligent, super hardworking. But very quickly, the sentiment changed. Just within a year of Chinese immigrants coming to the U.S., the governor of California at the time, his name was John Bigler, tried to get legislation passed to limit Chinese immigration because they were not assimilating to U.S. culture. They were like holding on to their own Chinese culture. And he was like, they're bringing in their Chinese ways, their heathen ways. So we need to prevent them from entering the U.S.
They're not trying to make you do their ways. They're just trying to like live.
Right.
Leave them alone.
They're just trying to live. Oh, I wrote this quote and I don't remember where I got it from. But, quote, Chinese immigrants also played an important role in developing much of the farmland of the western U.S., including the plantations of Hawaii and the vineyards of California.
No way.
So they were extremely important to a lot of industries, clearly.
Yeah.
As more immigrants came in and they left the gold fields, they started kind of setting up in these similar communities in bigger cities, especially more urban areas. And they kind of started becoming these Chinese-only neighborhoods or Chinatowns. Mm. And they were from, quote, San Diego to El Paso to Connecticut.
Wow.
So anywhere there's a big congregation of people. So, yeah. But unfortunately, not only was it like people of similar communities coming together to like form their own communities in any place, it was also due to racial segregation.
Love that.
Unfortunately, a lot of businesses would not hire Chinese workers for one reason or another, usually racism.
I hate this. Yeah.
So these people were building these communities where you could get a job and everyone spoke your language and people cared for you and like, you know, so it just, all these different things coming together, and there's a lot of social support. And then when new immigrants came in from China, they already had a similar community they could immediately join. And they even started forming their own like community associations because there wasn't a lot of like police, white police officers weren't going into these communities. So they kind of set up their own community organizations for safety. Not all was well and good though, because they did have their issues, which we'll talk about. You know, they had their own organized crime because why not?
Yeah, that tracks.
They had brothels, they had opium dens, you know, with change. And
it's almost like they're just people in a community, and there's always going to be bad things going on in communities.
Yeah. And
yeah,
not everyone that comes from a country is a darling, sweet, perfect angel. Like, because they're people.
Yeah. Or the opposite. Not everybody coming over from other countries is bad.
Right. Exactly.
They're just people.
They're just people. Majority good, but not all.
Yeah, not all.
So, in 1868, the Burlingame Treaty was signed. Burlingame was he was like a U.S. like consulate or ambassador to China, and the Burlingame Treaty granted Chinese immigrants with equal protections under the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment is most like commonly known as the amendment that ended slavery in the U.S. But it also granted like rights to immigrants and people of color in general.
Okay.
So the 14th Amendment is going to come up a lot in this episode. And unfortunately, like, even though, you know, under a treaty, they were granted like equal protections, all men are created equal, all, you know, that kind of stuff. There just continued to be this building resentment, primarily white, natural-born U.S. citizens. And the primary feeling, because again, like we talked about, a lot of Chinese laborers were willing to work jobs that a lot of, again, primarily white U.S. citizens were not willing to work, for the low pay. They, like what you said earlier, they were keeping what they could to survive and sending the rest to their families. And also, one thing that was going on is that there were merchant ships that were taking immigrants from China to the US, and they would like sponsor immigrants for like their passage, but then these immigrants had to pay those merchants back for their travel. Oh. So now, and that created even more desperation for just whatever money they could get.
Yeah.
And so now it's like, these Chinese immigrants are taking our jobs. I can see a lot of thoughts on your face.
I think y'all get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can hear my facial expressions. Yeah.
And just to top things off, by the 1870s, there was an economic depression in the U.S. Because it was after the Civil War and just a lot of bullshit was happening.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a rough time. A rough patch. Yeah.
So, backing up all the way to 1854, this section, I'm not going to try to have too much detail because the section is definitely a bummer, but it's very important to talk about, especially in the lead up to the big event. But this is violence against the Chinese immigrants. In 1854, there was a case called People versus Hall. And George Hall was a white miner who, in the gold fields, he had robbed a Chinese miner and then killed another Chinese miner. And this is a quote I got from asianstudies.org. Quote, based on the testimony of several Chinese witnesses, Hall was arrested and sentenced to hang. However, the California Supreme Court declared that the testimony of Chinese people could not be used against white defendants, and Hall was released.
What? That just made me nauseous.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
This was before the 14th Amendment. So people of color were not seen as being equal to white people, which there's a lot behind that we could get into. But yeah, they were seen as lesser. So this man who literally murdered another man did not even face criminal charges.
I hate everything about that.
Yeah. Just a few years later, in 1859, white miners rounded up about 75 Chinese miners in Shasta County, California, and marched them out of town while people threw rocks at them.
What?
The police force tried to handle the situation and free the captives, but violence continued in what would later be known as the Shasta Wars, and the people who would go on to lead riots would later all be acquitted. I know. It's so bad. This is really not a fun episode, y'all. I'm sorry. In 1871 in Los Angeles, a racial riot occurred in the Chinatown there, and a police officer was shot and a white man was killed. And in response, rioters ransacked the area, and by the end of the evening, 20 Chinese people were lynched.
Whoa.
This man came up a lot. I don't go too far into him because he was just kind of a gross human being. But there was a man named Dennis Kearney, and he was an Irish immigrant. And he was extremely influential in the anti-Chinese movement in the railroad industry. Yeah. And he led like protests and riots and stuff. And it's just like, you're also an immigrant. Yeah. But he's white. And what's crazy is that in some, I don't know. This is going into a lot of, like, the deep systemic issues. But for a time, like, Irish people weren't even seen as white. Italian people weren't seen as white. Like, it just, there's so much, like, layers and bullshit that's happening. It's like, but, I don't know. In the mid-1880s, at least 168 different communities had forced out their Chinese populations. In Rock Springs, Wyoming, 28 Chinese miners were killed. Homes were burned down. In the San Francisco Chinatown, looters robbed storefronts and shot people in the streets.
Oh my God.
And this is all in, like, the mid-1880s. In 1885 in Tacoma, Washington, hundreds of Chinese people were forced from their homes by white vigilantes and either hopped on freight cars or just started walking towards Portland, which was 140 miles away.
Holy shit. They walked that?
Yeah. And this became known as the Tacoma method of like ousting Chinese immigrants out from their communities, and this started being used all over the place. This is another thing I got from asianstudies.org. In 1875, the Page Act was passed, and this was, quote, the first federal law to limit immigration and specifically barred Chinese prostitutes.
It's very
because
specific.
Of like a moral argument of like, oh, they're all coming over here and they're all sex workers and trying to blah, blah, blah. Like, there weren't white sex workers all over the place and just everywhere.
I'm going to need us to start videoing these rough ones because I don't have words. And I feel like this is such bad podcasting because I'm not saying anything, but I'm making so many facial expressions.
There's a lot of like head and hands and like rubbing temples and like face palms and...
Yeah.
Just a lot of, like, nonverbal communication of your disgust about the whole thing.
I'm going to get wrinkles from my face doing the like, stink face scrunch.
Yeah.
Just, yeah. Okay.
And, again, more people are coming into the U.S., and Chinese culture is so different from stereotypical American culture. I mean, there's so many differences, like, especially like Eastern Asia, China is very collectivist. US is very individualistic. They have different moral values, different traditions, they're just very different, which is great. Yeah. But people did not appreciate these differences and started becoming angry that the Chinese were not assimilating to the US culture.
How dare they
Yeah.
not conform to a culture that's already a melting pot of other cultures.
Mm-hmm.
We're such a baby country. We're just a conglomeration of other cultures smushed together. Let them vibe. It doesn't matter.
And the U.S. as a country is barely 100 years old at this point. You know,
my
like
God.
by 1882, there were about 110,000 Chinese people in the U.S. So now we're getting into what will later be known as the Chinese Exclusion Act. Okay. So, like I said, Chinese neighborhoods are popping up, and Chinatown started becoming more widespread. In certain areas of these Chinatowns, there were gambling dens, opium dens, sex, like brothels. And this created a moral argument against Chinese immigrants. Look at all this crime they're bringing in.
It's no more than the crime you have.
Right. So between the 1850s and the 1870s, California started passing a bunch of laws and policies targeted to these neighborhoods. Like, you had to have special licenses to operate businesses. They started, like, passing policies that impeded the naturalization process. Mm-hmm. So people couldn't become, maybe not like citizens, but like what we would call today, like green card holders, you know? And all of these different policies and this treatment violated the 1868 Burlingame Sewer Treaty with China. So a lot of these policies were federally shut down. Like, this is discrimination. Mm-hmm. You guys can't do this. It also violates the 14th Amendment. Like, no. But by 1879, anti-immigration advocates were able to pass legislation in Congress to limit Chinese immigrants to 15 people per vessel.
What?
Yeah. But President Rutherford B. Hayes vetoed the bill, saying it violated the treaty.
Right.
So, and again, we've talked about like the party shift, but at the time in the 1870s, Democrats were very like, no more Chinese immigration, we're terminating Chinese immigration, and the Republicans were more mixed. There were some that were for free immigration, some were like more controlled immigration. Mm-hmm. a little bit more split down the middle. And Hayes was like, okay, let's try to, because I think he was a Republican. He was like, okay, I can't just, let's try to work something out. Let's try to do something that appeases the anti-immigration crowd, but also like doesn't violate this treaty that we have with another sovereign nation. By 1880, the next year, James B. Angel was a diplomat appointed to this new negotiation and would later establish the Angel Treaty, which restricted Chinese immigration. And by 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which prohibited Chinese laborers from immigrating to the U.S. for 10 years.
Damn.
And if people, like, who had already been in the U.S. were, like, traveling out of the U.S. and coming back, they had to have identifying papers with them. And Chinese people who were allowed in the country had to have certificates on their person, like, granting them access. This is the first act to, quote, place broad restrictions on immigration. And by this time, in 1882, we had a new president, Chester Arthur, and he signed the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Ugh.
And this is actually the first piece of legislature to specifically call out an ethnic group, like from a specific country.
I hate this.
Yeah. Thus creates this very delicate balancing act of pissing off your constituents that hate the Chinese and pissing off China, which is an entire ass country.
Yeah.
But Congress was like, we don't care. And in 1888, they passed the Scott Act, which made re-entry from China impossible, even for citizens, like people born in the U.S., who just were of Chinese descent, or people who had lived here for a long time. Like, if you lived in the U.S. or were born here and you left to go to China, you could not come back.
What the hell?
And this did piss off China.
Yeah.
Like, they were already not feeling great about the whole Exclusion Act already, but there were still, like, in special circumstances, people that could come over. But now it's like, you're not letting anyone over. This is violating the treaty. But what could they do?
Yeah.
And by 1892, which was a decade after, Congress voted to renew the 10-year ban with the Geary Act.
Oh, my God.
For an additional 10 years, that was in place. And in 1902, it was made permanent. Permanent ban. And they extended the ban to Chinese immigrants, even coming from Hawaii and the Philippines. And that's how some people would bypass it. Instead of coming straight to the U.S. from China, they would go to Hawaii or the Philippines and then come to the U.S. And now it's like, no, if you come from a Western port, like in the Pacific Ocean, and you're Chinese, you can't come to the U.S.
What the hell?
It's awful.
This is so bad.
It's awful. In 1898, there was a man named Wong Kim Ark. He was born in San Francisco, so he was a natural-born citizen. And with all these acts and stuff, he was denied re-entry after visiting family in China. Mm-hmm. So he actually filed a lawsuit and it went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, who did rule in his favor that birthright citizenship was granted under the 14th Amendment.
Okay.
But did that change anything? No.
So he still couldn't get back home.
It seemed like for him, he was allowed in, but that was not widespread to everyone.
So he could get back home, but it didn't change anything as far as other people.
Right. Like,
Gotcha.
It wasn't like a law that was like, oh, it's unconstitutional to ban everyone from re-entering the U.S. if they were born here. Like that, it was basically just him.
My God.
By 1905, Chinese merchants in China had organized an anti-American boycott. Mm-hmm. And the Chinese government was like, good job, you guys. We can't tell you officially that we approve, but like, yeah, because this whole thing is pissing all of us off.
Yeah.
But Theodore Roosevelt, who, again, was now president, he was like, okay, I see what you're doing, China. I understand why you're doing the boycott, but, like, it's kind of making us look bad, you know? It's like, can you, like, ask them to tone it down a little bit, China? Like, ask them to tone down the boycott. And after 5 months, the boycott ended up losing steam. Because, like, the Chinese government stopped supporting it in the shadows, and it just kind of faded out. So, well, just because there's a ban doesn't mean, I mean, again, like in modern day, like just because there's a ban doesn't mean it's going to stop people from coming in, right?
Right.
So between 1882 and 1943, the southwestern border of the U.S. was used as an illegal port of entry for Chinese immigrants. Wow. Some of whom would adopt Spanish identities and speak enough Spanish to pass through customs, because at the time, the U.S. and Mexico had an open border policy.
Wow. That's impressive, honestly.
And I guess racists can't tell the difference between people of Mexican culture and people of Chinese descendants.
I could never pass as anything other than what I am. Could you imagine me trying to pass as a fluent Spanish speaker? Hell no.
And, like, English and Spanish come from a similar, like, background.
Yeah.
You know, like, there's, like, some shared linguistics, like, way, way, way back then. Chinese and Spanish, they could not be more different languages. They have a completely different system of sounds, and, I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do, right?
Yeah. I'm impressed. Color me impressed.
Yeah. And it worked. I don't think there was a ton of people getting in through this way, but I couldn't find official numbers, especially from like a 60-year time period.
Right.
And these are people who are undocumented, just kind of entering the U.S. So I wasn't able to get numbers on how many people came through the border this way. So moving into the 20th century, a few people from China were being admitted into the U.S., like merchants, students, diplomats, like very important people, and they were allowed to bring their families with them.
Okay. And
so this started kind of like a little side business where people with granted access to the U.S. would like adopt, quote unquote, other Chinese people to bring them to the U.S. And these were called paper sons and daughters because they had like paper documents saying they were family.
Wow.
And quote unquote legally immigrate with them to the U.S.
Wow.
So again, they're coming up with workarounds over this horribly racist, awful piece of legislation.
Yeah, that's awful.
And we'll talk about it later. I don't think that having policy around immigration is a bad thing. But when it's just like a blanket ban across an entire ethnic group because there's some kind of moral argument against them as a culture and people, that's the issue. That's the problem I have.
Yeah.
So in 1924, the Immigration Act passed, and this allowed, because the 1800s were kind of a free-for-all for immigration into the U.S. On both coasts. Like New York had,
Island.
Yes.
Ellis.
Thank you.
Ellis Island.
Thank you.
I was like, oh my God, it's right there. It's right there.
My brain just kept going, Long Island, Long Island. I was like, that's not right. Thank you for understanding my weird hand movements at you.
I speak Morgan.
I was just like angling my hands toward her, like, the place.
The island.
The place.
Yeah,
The place where people came in. Oh boy. And again, like the Chinese were the only immigrants restricted. Like everyone else could come into the US, like people from Europe, people from Africa, people from wherever could still, and even other people from Asia could come in, just not China. But in 1924, when the Immigration Act, it absolutely excluded Asia from immigrating to the US, which is insane. That's an entire continent of people that are banned from entering the U.S.
For what reason? We don't like you. Ugh.
But again, there were some people that could be permitted. Between 1910 and 1940, 175,000 Chinese immigrants did come into the U.S. And I think that was both probably legally and illegally. Okay. But that's over 30 years. And even when they came into the U.S., like even legally, they were like, okay, go to this Chinatown and don't leave, basically. But as part of the 14th Amendment, and like the U.S. naturalization process, any child born of immigrants in the U.S. was automatically registered as a U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
So parents would purchase property in their children's names to, one, buy property in the first place.
Yeah.
And two, open businesses and other endeavors they wouldn't have been able to. So now they're just like opening all these lines of credit under the children's names when they're still infants. So that's awesome.
I'm sure that didn't backfire one bit.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm sure it worked out for a lot of people, but
it's not a perfect system by any means.
No.
In 1920, the amount of people from China coming in to the U.S. was as low as 16,000, which is very few people.
Yeah. But
during World War I, there were actually a lot of Chinese people in the U.S. that enlisted in the U.S. Army, especially because it was a reaction to the horrors going on in China at the hands of the Japanese.
Right.
Half of the 13,000 Chinese people in the U.S. Army were not U.S. citizens, but they still fought on behalf of the U.S.
And they're being treated like absolute dog shit.
Yeah, they're being treated as not even people, essentially. So we're jumping forward. I've kind of been skipping around like the early 1900s to like 1920s and 30s. We're going to jump forward to around World War II. Mm-hmm. The Exclusion Act, the Chinese Exclusion Act, was not repealed until 1943, which was like 60 years after it was signed into law. Because China was the U.S.'s ally during World War II. And thousands of men, again, joined the U.S. military. Again, because of the horrors.
We were just like, okay, we need you, so we're cool now.
Yeah, like, well, you fought for us in the First Great War. That was really cool, but, you know, whatever. But the second time it happened, okay, I guess we can, like, do you a solid, probably.
Fine, you can come in.
But there was still, like, a huge limitation. Only 105 Chinese people a year could come into the U.S.
105,000?
No. 105 people.
People.
Yeah.
That's nothing!
Yeah. But after the war, attitudes started changing a little bit, especially with the War Brides Act, the GI Fiancés Act, where, like, men who went overseas would... It's not funny. It's not funny. I don't know. It's like a weird, like, disgust laugh, but men would find war brides, quote unquote, and they could bring them back home and marry them, and they could, like, do all that. Things started easing up. Like, especially after the war, like, things were easing up. The restrictions were they were kind of still there, but they weren't as strict. And so more people started coming in, especially around the 1950s. Mm-hmm. But after World War II, the 1950s, what became really big in China? Communism.
Oh, yeah. I was like, oh, what was it? I was still in, like, video game mode. I'm like, I don't know. What was really popular? Like, oh, no, communism. Yeah.
And what was America absolutely terrified of in the 1950s?
Communism.
Yeah. So any immigrants coming in from China in the 50s were, like, seen as, like, very suspicious and shifty and probably criminals, even though I think a lot of people are just trying to, like,
get away from the communism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when the Communist Party took over China, that, again, severely restricted people coming into the U.S., but this time on China's side. Actually, I watched, it was from PBS, and it's like it's like a Making America series, but it follows like different diasporas of people coming into the U.S. And this specific episode focused on Chinese immigrants specifically. Mm-hmm. And there was this one man who was, especially in like the like 70s, like 60s or 70s, I think. Mm-hmm. He, like right before the Communist Party took over majorly, he was like a student. He was very highly educated. He wore glasses. And then when the Communist Party took over, like he was trapped in China, but he managed to get his sister to the U.S. before like the severe travel bans happened. And he had always wanted to go to America. Like he'd heard about how great it was and he'd always wanted to go, but he wasn't able to. And he actually spent like a long time in prison because he was an academic and was kind of anti-Communist Party. And he did finally make it to the U.S. in the 90s.
Wow.
And he was like a 75-year-old man.
I wonder if he ever connected with his sister again.
He did.
Oh my God, good.
I know. They were able to get like a couple letters just because, I mean, for decades, she didn't know if her brother was alive or dead.
Yeah.
Because she literally, like, as like the military was coming in to shut in, he like literally shoved her on a train without like any of her shit. And like she got to the U.S. And he was able to bring his wife and they lived there for like 5 years before she died. But he was like an elderly man. He was like, I'm finally here in America. And I was just like, oh my God. I think he went by Benny.
All right, she laid back down.
Okay.
Apparently she just had an opinion.
Another thing I saw mentioned in the PBS documentary was these people that had rediscovered back, I think it was like the 60s or 70s, had rediscovered the Angel Island Detention Center. And this was, I think it's like off the coast of California. Mm-hmm. It may be in Hawaii. I'm not 100% sure, but somewhere, it's an island somewhere. And it was the site of U.S. immigration station between 1910 and 1940, which processed immigrants coming from China. And on the walls in the detention center, there's like thousands of Chinese characters of like just people writing notes, people like, not really graffiti, but like, because I mean, people were held there for a long time. It was like it was a detention center.
Yeah.
It's now a state park. It houses.
It's California.
Thank you so much.
It's California. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. It's now a state park, and it houses the Angel Island Immigration Museum and Detention Barracks Museum. And it's so interesting because like in the islands, like this tropical, like there's palm trees and like a lot of bushes, and it looks so nice. And there's just like this detention center. I mean, it's not like this horrible, horrible building or anything. I think it's like a pale yellow and it's got like columns and stuff. But I think there was a lot of sadness that happened there.
Yeah.
But it's important to the story for sure. So now we're moving into the 60s. A lot of stuff happens in the 60s, just all over the place. I'm sorry there's not really a narrative to this. It's kind of everywhere. In 1965, we have the Immigration and Naturalization Act, or the Hart-Celler Act. And this grants, like, completely repeals any kind of, like, Chinese exclusion to immigration. Of course, it's an immigration policy. It did put a cap of 170,000 immigrants outside of the Western Hemisphere total, and no more than 20,000 immigrants a year from one country. But it wasn't, that's to all.
Everyone, yes.
Right. Not just limiting Chinese immigration. And this, especially like in the 60s and like with everything going on in China, there were a lot more immigrants coming, like before in like the 1800s, a lot of immigrants were coming in from rural China and like more poor villages and stuff. And now in the 60s, there's more people coming from major cities, almost exclusively like from Hong Kong, Shanghai, Taiwan. Another topic, I don't really have a way to segue into this. Sorry, my notes are just kind of all over the place. The Immigration Naturalization Act actually, it just came in at a time of like a lot of social change going on in the U.S. anyway, because it was right in the middle of the civil rights movement too.
Right.
In the 1970s, really the only places that Chinese immigrants were coming from was Hong Kong and Taiwan because they're not considered on the mainland of China when there was a major lockdown of immigration from China in the Communist Party. But as the 70s progressed, things started opening up a little bit. Also in the 70s, we have the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of anti-Asian resentment in general, not just to Chinese immigrants, not just to Vietnamese people, to Asian people in general. And I think this came up in the PBS documentary I was watching, but I mean, there were Chinese American soldiers who fought in Vietnam, and they received a lot of racist comments because they quote unquote looked like the enemy. And I'm not going to repeat the racial slurs that I saw because I don't do that.
Yeah.
But it didn't, I don't know.
Like mind-boggling. Yeah.
It is. And there were just Asian Americans across the board that, again, like both fought in the war and protested against the war.
Yeah.
Just like with white U.S. citizens, there were people who fought in the war and people who protested the war, you know. There was actually the person who designed the Vietnam War Memorial was a Chinese woman. Her name was Madeleine. Oh. She was like a young woman. I think she was in college when she designed the Vietnam Memorial. There was like a contest. Yeah. And hers was selected. And she received a lot of horrible racist comments.
Of course.
Again. And like, there's just... Like, she's not Vietnamese. She's Chinese. It's a completely different culture and society. But because she looks a certain way, they're like, oh, you can't have designed a Vietnam War memorial, you Asian. Like, it's just, it's so ridiculous. And she's American. She's.
She looks lovely.
Mm-hmm. The Asian American civil rights movement actually began in the Chinatown in Manhattan in 1974. So a few years after the Black civil rights movement, in Manhattan there was a developer who was hired to build a developer refused to hire Asian workers in a Chinatown, and the project was called Confucius Plaza. And the developer refused to hire Asian workers for a Chinatown construction project.
The fuck?
Yeah. Doesn't make any kind of sense at all. So this movement started of like, hey, and I have some pictures from like different protests and stuff in the show notes for you, but just a lot of like, hey,
that's dumb.
We deserve rights too. That's really stupid. And the movement continued into the 80s. And there's a society created called the Asian Americans for Equality, or the AAFE. And they continue to fight for equal wages and workers' rights, affordable and safe housing, anti-discrimination practices. This is not new stuff to fight for in a civil rights movement, just specific to Asian Americans. Now we have a very sad story to cover.
Oh no.
So, and this came up in the documentary and a couple other sources I read, because this was the first, targeted hate crime reported in a long time against a specific person. So, we if you're old enough to have heard about it, Detroit, Michigan was a powerhouse of car manufacturing for a long time. But as more foreign imports started becoming more popular, especially from Japan, the automotive industry in Detroit and it's not just because of foreign imports. The industry was not regulated very well, and it just ended up collapsing due to poor practices. And a lot of this created anti-Japanese resentment. Or just anti-Asian resentment. So there was a man named Vincent Chin, and he was out at a bar one night for his bachelor party. It was called the Fancy Pants Club in Highland Park in, I think, Detroit. And there were two men who were also in the bar. Their names were Ronald Ebens and Michael Nitz, and they had just been laid off from their jobs in the automotive industry. And they saw this Chinese man, and they just started harassing him. Vincent Chin had nothing to do with, he didn't even work in the automotive industry. He was just an Asian man. And things escalated, and at some point, a lot of things happened I'm not going to go into. Vincent Chin was killed by these two men.
Oh. For his bachelor party?
Yeah.
Oh.
I know. It was so sad. Like, him and his fiancée were going to get married in like a couple weeks from this incident.
Oh,
like 2 weeks.
God.
I know. It was so sad. It's so sad. This is just a really sad story. So there was a huge outcry, especially in the larger Asian community.
Right.
This led to one of the first Asian American advocacy groups being known nationally, because they were like, this is fucking bullshit. Like, this is a hate crime. And so Ebens and Nitz were arrested. Mm-hmm. They essentially just got off scot-free. But, so, like, they basically got a slap on the wrist, and people are like, that's bullshit. Like, the Asian American advocacy group was like, that's bullshit. So it ended up going to this federal court.
Okay.
And this was the first federal prosecutions of a civil rights case on behalf of an Asian American. But the federal case was thrown out.
What?
These men basically served no jail time.
What?
For the murder of this man.
I think I forgot to breathe. Are you kidding me?
It's so tragic. So Vincent's mother ended up filing a civil suit. She was like, apparently they're not going to be punished by law, so I'll file a civil suit. And she actually won the civil suit.
Okay. And
she was granted financial compensation. But she has never seen a dime. And they have never been to jail. Devastating.
It's just one thing after another.
Yeah. It's so sad. And at the time, there is a stereotype, especially among just the general, greater Asian community, that they were the quote-unquote model minority. And I think that's a phrase that still persists to this day, not as much, but it's something that was discussed in the several different documentaries I've seen, and just people I've spoken to. I have friends who are of Asian descent, mm-hmm. and there's just this kind of lens that they're seen through where they're almost white, but not white enough, they've been mm-hmm. They still face discrimination, but they're seen as the better minority because the U.S. is racist as fuck. Just terrible. So in the 90s, things start looking up a bit. There's up to 1.6 million Chinese people in the U.S. And there's another immigration act that was passed in 1990, and it relaxed some of the strictest policies for immigration. It was more case by case. Like if you're coming to the U.S. and you had existing families, what was your employment? But there was still a cap of no more than 7% of the available visas going to any single foreign state. So, one country wouldn't dominate all of the different visas going out.
Right. Okay.
There's still things that aren't awesome, especially rising in the 80s and 90s. In Chinatowns, a lot of sweatshops. And sweatshops are still a thing, not just in Chinatowns. And even into the 90s, there were political refugees from communist China that were seeking asylum and stuff. And one person that was in the documentary, his name is Jerry Yang. He is an immigrant from Taiwan, and he founded Yahoo.
What?
Yeah.
Yahoo.
I know.
I was thinking of Yoo-hoo, but when I sang that, but I don't think I ever thought about who created Yahoo.
Me neither. When he popped up in the documentary, I was like, oh, I haven't even thought about Yahoo in a decade at least.
Yeah. I still have a couple Yahoo email addresses. that I've had for a couple decades that are just linked to things. But yeah.
Yeah, he was a kid when he came over from Taiwan, and I think grew up in just like broader Silicon Valley and founded Yahoo.
Nice.
So now we're getting into just modern day facts.
Yeah.
In 2011, 2012, quote, Congress condemned the Chinese Exclusion Act and affirmed a commitment to preserve civil rights and constitutional protections for all people.
Good. I mean,
I'm making a lot of faces.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the resolutions stating the previously mentioned quote passed unanimously in both the House and Senate.
Good.
So at least back then, people were on the same page about civil rights and constitutional protections for all people. They are actually people immigrating from China. They are the third largest group of immigrants after Mexicans and Indians.
Okay.
Interestingly, within the past few years, there has been an increase in illegal immigrants from China. At the U.S.-Mexico border, in 2022, there are about 2,200. And in 2024, there are 38,200.
What? That's a big jump.
Mm-hmm. And at the Canada border, it went from 6,700 in 2022 to 12,400 in 2024. So it doubled.
Wow.
In 2023, 2.5 million immigrants were detained at the U.S. border, and about 37,000 of those people were from China.
Huh.
And rates have gone up about 10 times since 2022. So most of these people from China who are illegally immigrating into the U.S., a lot of them are like middle class, who like had businesses or stuff that after COVID-19 and like China had a very, very severe COVID policies in place. Yeah. A lot of these people are facing pretty significant financial hardship. And so they've like lost everything. And so they're trying to get to the US to start over. There are how-to guides on social media on how to get to the US without a visa.
What?
So apparently the kind of guide, apparently in Ecuador, you don't need a visa from China to go to Ecuador. So a lot of people go to Ecuador and then they will travel from Ecuador to the US.
Oh. That's crazy. Oh, man.
That's dedication right there, really. Like,
yeah.
You are either flying or sailing all the way from China to Ecuador. I can't imagine how long that takes because Ecuador's in South America.
Yeah.
And then you are like either by foot or by train or by car or truck or whatever traveling through like South America and Central America through Mexico. Like that's a lot.
Yeah.
And like a lot of this is like because green cards take forever. Legal immigration is a pain in the ass.
A nightmare.
And just overall hardships obtaining visas. Like visas are really only for like if you're going to school or if you have like specific job duties or if it's just like for travel. But it's hard to get those, especially like as I think immigration policy just continues to deteriorate in the US. But the overall growth rate of Chinese immigrants into the US has decreased since the 2000s.
Okay.
The largest population of Chinese people is in New York City, or the largest Chinatown is in New York City with about 100,000 people living and working there. And there are about 2.5 million Chinese Americans in the U.S.
All right.
And that's what I have for Chinese immigration into the U.S. A very sad story. I'm sorry for bringing the mood down, but this is super important to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely worth talking about.
And I'm sure, as you've seen, a lot of parallels to a lot of conversations over the past 20 years about immigration and immigrants and taking our jobs and moral arguments and, you know, all that stuff.
All I think about is the South Park episode where they're going, they took our gerbs. germs. Well, this was great. In like a very well done, but now I'm sad kind of a way.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I know it's really sad, but it was, I have almost 2 full pages of sources because I really had to, it was one of those puzzle piece episodes where I just had to get little snippets from a bunch of different places. And I was actually inspired when I went to Seattle. I went to the Museum of History and Industry they have there, which is super fun, super awesome. If you ever go to Seattle, go to that museum. It's super cool. And they had this, because Seattle started as like a lumber mill town. Yeah. And a lot of Chinese immigrants came to Seattle to work in the lumber industry and the railroads up there. And I was like, I didn't even know, like, I didn't really even think about that. And they had like artifacts from people, like Chinese people at the time. Like they had some like ware that they had, some bowls and pottery and stuff that people would use at the time. And it talked about the violence that they faced, like the Tacoma incident, which isn't too far from Seattle. And I was like, I feel like people don't talk about this, and that's something I really want to explore. So here we are.
Here we are, talking about it.
Yes.
Exploring it.
Yes, and I hope you all learned something. I hope, even though this was a real big bummer, that there's some value in recognizing patterns.
Yeah.
And just understanding that excluding an entire people from entering the U.S. does not have great, like, historical precedent.
No. And regardless of where people are from, they are just people.
Mm-hmm.
And different isn't bad. It's just different.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes different is really, really good.
Yeah. I don't know what I would do without Chinese food. And I know it's not authentic. It's very Americanized, but God, I love it. I'd be so sad.
Me too.
Just like cultural food. Like, I love Thai food. I love Mexican food. I love Greek food. I love Indian food. Like, more food. Like
we like food.
I love food. I love eating, you guys. That's why I'm fat.
You are not, I swear to God. Listen, I didn't go to culinary school just to learn how to make American food. Like, I love all foods.
Yes.
And some more than others, but I love all foods. And even just, like, diving into, like, not even just their food, just, like, other aspects of their culture is fascinating. And you can always learn something from someone else.
Yes.
And the way they're living.
Yes.
It's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we get to socials?
Yes. Let's get into socials.
I'm yawning. Oh my God. So you can check us out on Facebook.
Ill-Equipped History Podcast group and page.
Email us at
ill-equippedhistory@gmail.com.
It's like, did I say that right? Instagram.
At Ill-Equipped History.
TikTok.
At Ill-Equipped History.
And Patreon.
Patreon.com/Ill-Equippedhistory.
$5 get you stickers.
Yes, and Emily and I were talking about our next bonus episode. I'm really excited about it because we definitely had like a weird universe brain meld moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was one of those where, like, the other day was like, ooh, I need to bring this up with Morgan. It's very topical. It's very timely. An anniversary is coming up of this incident. And I told Morgan about it before we recorded. And she was like, oh, I thought about that the other day and thought that would make a good episode. And we think it might be on the same day that we did that. So... Brain meld.
We are connected by the universe.
The bios can't keep us apart mentally.
No. We just like astral project into each other's consciousnesses like once a week or something.
Yeah. Who needs Zoom when Morgan can be sitting beside me in like a ghost form and we could just pod like that? I mean,
man, how convenient would that be if I could literally just like astral project my form to just like hang out with you like whenever I wanted? That would be awesome.
We would never leave each other's side.
We we would just spend all of our time in astral form and our bodies would just like waste away and be like, well, we'll just like do our responsibilities as ghosts, I guess. That's fine.
We'll rotate. So while the kids are at school, I'll come hang out with you.
Okay.
And then when you get out of school but the kids are home, you come hang out with me.
Okay.
And then it'll be fine.
You know what? That would make my job so much more enjoyable if you could just like be next. I wouldn't get anything done at work, but I could be writing my reports and you could be like chatting with me. That would be so fun.
I'll sit in meetings with you and mean mug anyone that's not nice to you. Be like, you want to fight?
Oh man, I'm just imagining it like someone saying something that was dumb and you just like giving them stank faces or just like insulting them and only I can hear you. That would be hilarious.
Oh my god. I'll turn invisible, throw stuff at them every time they say something stupid. Just
what's going on? Is the AC acting up in here?
Come on, so science. Come on, science.
Come on. Corey, like, we told you to build a teleportation device. Now we need you to build an astral projection device.
Yeah.
Okay,
out of the three of us, she is smart enough to do it, so. Yeah.
I like if she just came home one day, she's like, "Hey guys, I invented a black hole." I wouldn't be surprised at all.
That tracks. Yeah.
I know that's not what she does at all. She does like security for computers, but also
she could tell me that she accidentally typed the wrong code into a computer and it created a black hole, and I'd be like, I believe that.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
Are you sure you did that accidentally or on purpose?
Yeah. Yeah. Were you trying to throw someone in the black hole? Like, what was the situation?
I have a few ideas too. Let me know.
Yeah. I've got a list, actually,
yes.
If I could go get the list.
Yes. Let me find their addresses really quick. I haven't seen some of them in a decade, but...
Oh, my God. We're just kidding.
Yes.
No one was thrown in a black hole in the making of this podcast.
It's a joke. Lol.
Ha 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 ha
ha. Anyway, go learn something new about a culture you don't know or aren't very familiar with. Learn something.
Go learn something and go get some good Chinese food.
Yeah.
Don't
go to Panda Express. Go to like the most hole in the wall like dive Chinese restaurant where like actual like Chinese people go eat, and you'll have the bombest food you can ever imagine.
I am now depressed all over again that they closed Ming Dynasty in Athens, because even my uncle said he didn't care where he went because he travels for work. He never found Chinese food better than Ming Dynasty in freaking Athens. And they forced them to close to build a Marshall's, and the town was pissed. I'm so mad. I didn't need a Marshall's. I needed those egg rolls, please. We literally got to go like the last month that they were open, which was a year ago. We got them to go, and my family just sat around the table, and we were just really sadly eating. We were like, this is the last one.
That's so sad.
I know. And the same people owned it the entire time. They like watched us grow up, and like my brother, he'd go through growth spurts. They'd be like, "Oh my God, he's so tall!" Like they knew us, they knew the community, and we were like, "Please, we want Ming Dynasty back."
That's so sad.
I know. I need to go find a replacement now.
I found a few places. I mean, Nashville is just lousy with like different ethnic foods anyway. I think there's a Chinese restaurant that's really good, like 5 minutes from my house, and it's like literally in like a little strip mall next to like a hot yoga and a Subway, and it's so good.
Can we go there next time?
It's one of those restaurants. Yes, it's one of those restaurants where like you can barely even see the pictures on the menu. They're so faded, and
nice.
Nothing's spelled correctly, and the food is fucking bomb.
Listen, you find a hole in a wall restaurant, and you're either going to get the worst meal you've ever had, or you're going to get something that will take you to the astral plane. Like, that it's so good. There's no hole in the wall restaurant that's just meh. It's either horrible or it's so good. I've been to both. Yes, I have too. Anyway, apparently we're hungry because we're just talking about Chinese food. I know.
That's not the point of this episode.
In the fridge. I go get a snack.
Well, thank you for listening.
Okay, bye.